Okay, so I'm not even sure I should be reviewing this. Not only am I like a month late to the party here, but Hairbrained Schemes Battletech is clearly not a role-playing game. Although it does have character advancement, experience, and even upgrades and gear. Sort of. I mean, if you count the individual mechs that you can salvage and refit, that's gear, right? But it's not a role-playing game. It is, at its core, a tactical combat game. One based on a miniatures game with a long and storied history, and that in fact has its own spin-off tabletop role-playing game, of which I have an early edition. But you know what? I'm going to take a look at it anyway. Because the original Battletech is actually the second tabletop game I ever got into after Dungeons & Dragons, and although I never became the sort of hardcore fan that some have, I've always had a version of it of some form on my shelf or on my computer when it was adapted into prior series of games. Games such as MechWarrior, however, concentrated on piloting a single battle mech, and still other series set in the same universe brought it into a real-time strategy style, whereas Hairbrained Schemes Battletech tries to capture more of the feel of the tabletop game by allowing you to direct the actions of an entire lance of battle mechs as they fight over varied terrain in turn-based combat. Funded on a Kickstarter back in 2015, Battletech was developed by the aforementioned Hairbrained Schemes, a studio co-founded by Jordan Weissman, one of the founders of FASA, who put out the tabletop game back in 1984, and who in fact co-designed the original version. Hairbrained Schemes had put out Shadowrun Returns prior, as well as its sequels, and those were also based on another property once developed by FASA, so the bar on the fidelity to the original tabletop system and setting can be expected to be pretty high, to say the least. The game immediately starts with a cutscene showing an abbreviated history of the start of the Succession Wars, which can be useful for those who aren't familiar with the Battletech universe, but it really doesn't provide enough context in terms of setting the scene without a lot of reading up on things. Fortunately, in-game, most historical and place names have tooltips that have information provided, so an observant person could catch up with what is relevant to the story at hand. The Battletech universe and history itself is complex enough that I honestly think that's the best approach, since if you really tried to get into depth of it, there'd be a lot of background information that's, quite frankly, not really useful to the game. When you begin to craft your MechWarrior, you are given a number of choices that determine your background, defining where you're from and what your career course was, essentially setting some traits that interact with various future decisions both in the main quest and in side events that you run into. This all seems well and good, except that the limited relevance of some of these future choices makes this seem like little more than fluff. Still, it's nice fluff, it's good to have, and the physical character customization is pretty solid and actually pretty open-ended. Once you enter the game, aside from the cutscenes, there are two major modes. The ship mode, which is a glorified set of management screens, and the mission mode, where most of the combat actually takes place. Battletech follows the tried and true method of exposing the player to game concepts one at a time, starting with the mission mode and gradually acclimating the player to maneuvering the mech, to combat and basic tactics, and then to the ship and crew management itself. At first you are given a limited amount of space on a small Leopard-class dropship, which really kind of narrows your focus in on just one lance worth of mechs and the local missions around where you start. But you do eventually get a larger ship that includes the ability to upgrade many of the capabilities. In the ship mode, you are either in orbit or in transit. You have an amount of funds that you can use to buy spare parts, repair mechs, hire and pay crew, and so forth. Every 2 weeks, you can set your budget, which can have an effect on crew morale. Morale is used in mission mode to execute a few special attacks and abilities. The timeline shows active jobs, and travel, repairing mechs, Healing mech warriors, upgrading the ship, and traveling from mission to mission all take an amount of time. The timeline can be paused to allow for changes at any time. Furthermore, as the timeline advances, especially during travel to different systems, random events can pop up. These events have a variety of outcomes and may provide temporary penalties or benefits to the crew. When the ship is in orbit, you can also visit the hiring hall and the store. The hiring hall allows you to hire new mech warriors, and new equipment can be purchased in the store. What can be purchased varies from system to system, and your reputation with that system's controller can affect both the price and the availability of certain things. You can undertake contracts at any time, which are basically your mission selection, but more on that in a little bit. The barracks allow you to manage your mech warriors. As your mech warriors engage in battle and later engage in training, they gain experience that can be spent to augment their gunnery, piloting, guts, and tactics skills. These are the only statistics that really matter. In fact, they're the only ones you can have any control over, and as you improve them, you may unlock certain abilities. The first 2 skills to be raised to rank 5 offer the first selection of abilities, either active or passive actions that can be used in combat, and each mech warrior can have 2 of these. The first skill a mech warrior raises to rank 8 adds another ability, and each mech warrior can only have 1 of those. Otherwise, any mech warrior can raise any skill to level 10 given enough time and experience. Each mech warrior may also have a certain number of traits due to their service record, although these really only matter during random events. The mech bay is where you can store, refit, and repair your mechs. Active mechs cost money to upkeep, so it's important to only have those that you think you'll actually use. Otherwise, refitting a mech is largely done as it would in the tabletop version, except that you are limited only to gear that you have purchased or personally salvaged. With the game set during the Secession Wars, this means that finding Star League era gear, possibly during certain missions, is pretty rare, and if that gear is destroyed in combat, it cannot be replaced. Some weapons also have certain special bonuses as well. It's entirely possible to find a medium laser or the like for sale or on the battlefield that has a slight accuracy or damage bonus. Engineering allows ship upgrades later on, which cost money, take time, and improve the efficiency of the ship in various tasks, while navigation allows you to plot a course to a new star system in order to look for new work, provided that you don't just take a contract that already has the travel cost built in. Finally, Captain's Quarters allows you to review your finances, your reputation with the various factions, and customize your company's logo. Of note, reputation is built up with each faction as you accomplish missions for them. Each of these areas usually has an NPC you can speak with as well, and more appear during the storyline, who give you background and tips on their area of expertise. Now, accepting contracts is where you get into the combat section, and that's really the meat of the game. Most of them are randomly generated side missions which take many forms, but priority missions, or the main storyline missions, are also accepted here. You can do these in any order that you wish, and none really seem to have deadlines. This can be pretty amusing when a contract is talking about a lance already on the ground causing havoc, actively pounding people away, and then you decide to take like 2 months to get around to it. Each contract has a difficulty rating, which can give you an indication onto what your lance tonnage should be, a biome description, which can be important for deciding your mech loadout, and then the pay, salvage, and reputation limits. When you negotiate the contract, you can decide on the ratios of these 3 aspects that you want to set as your reward. Once you've negotiated your contract, you can select your team just by dragging and dropping whatever mechs you want to use, and then which mech warriors you want in each mech. A lance can only include up to 4 mechs, and you'll usually want your 4 heaviest mechs that are in good repair, although sometimes it can be helpful to load lighter mechs in order to scout or intercept certain things, or mechs with a particular loadout for certain environments. Once you're ready to deploy, you enter a potentially really long loading screen from which you can then launch the mission. In the mission, you are given a map made of detailed terrain, which, while not explicitly divided into hexes, is basically hex-based. You are given a briefing and then a list of goals, and then each mech has a turn. Prior to enemy contact, this can be pretty swift, but once contact is made, the turn-based order becomes very important. Mechs can be assigned initiative based on their tonnage class and potentially pilot skill. In general, light mechs move before medium, which move before heavy, and so on. Then, within each weight class, sides alternate. So if the enemy and you both have medium mechs, one side will move one mech, and then the other side will move one mech, and so on and so forth. When it's your turn, however, you can choose between any of your mechs that can currently move and have initiative, or you can reserve your mechs for the following initiative phase. During a turn in combat, each mech can move and then attack. Movement can be via walking or jump jets, or if you wish to forego an attack, by sprinting. Moving further builds up things called evasion chevrons, which penalize opponent attacks, and entering certain terrain can provide cover or other modifiers, such as a difficulty being attacked in melee. You also have to select a facing, and as facing changes cost movement as well, this can limit what direction you end up facing if you just use all your movement. Attacking is usually as straightforward as selecting attack and then the enemy mech. This will filter out which weapons can actually reach it, considering range and line of sight, and each weapon has a % chance to hit, as well as ammo where applicable. Each weapon fired generates heat, so it's possible to overheat your mech rapidly if its cooling systems are damaged or just aren't designed to keep up in the first place. You can disable some weapons as well, however, so if you're in danger of overheating but you do need to have some sort of attack out, you can choose not to fire all of your weaponry. The weapons then fire in order, and hit locations and damage are calculated as appropriate. Weapon hits can damage not only armor and internal systems, but also the stability of the target. Hit a target enough times, hard enough, and they'll fall down. Attacking prone targets, or attacking using a precision strike attack, one of the things that morale is used for, will enable you to effectively call shots on a certain part of an enemy mech. This can be very useful for obliterating smaller mechs outright, or for disabling larger mechs in such a way as to have an easier time salvaging them after the battle, which is an important strategy to use. A particular mech may have other attack options, as dictated by the pilot's skill, or may brace, which is used instead of an attack. It regains stability lost and readies to receive fire, just basically allowing the mech to cool down and get ready to take a hit. There is a lot about the battle system that is taken from the tabletop game, and this can contribute to what some might consider unfair scenarios. Having a key mech warrior taken out by a lucky headshot, for instance, can feel a little cheap. But honestly, we're talking about multi-story machines smashing into each other with artillery pieces, so I'd be surprised if a pilot didn't get utterly obliterated from time to time. Missions have a wide variety as well, ranging from escorts to base captures to simple hunt and kill types. I was actually rather impressed with the variety of missions, although once you play it enough, some of them will become really old. In fact, play it enough and you'll start to see maps repeat as well. Although there is a rather large amount of random maps, they're not really random, they're just have random enemy emplacements on pre-built maps. The pre-built maps are well designed, however. They're well designed enough to appear unique, although that uniqueness can make them stand out when they do pop up again. Still, one can only do so much and still have a well-designed field of battle to work on. Once a quest is completed, you get money, reputation, and salvage based on the terms of your contract, and any bonus goals you may have accomplished. Salvage is the important part, because you can select a small amount of priority salvage, and then the rest is filled in randomly. This is going to be your primary source of new mechs and weaponry, so it's important to balance this out with the rest of the band's needs. And once you're done and back in the ship, you basically rinse and repeat. Now, this could get old, but honestly, tactical combat is really what the game's about, and I think it does an excellent job of portraying the tabletop game in computer format. Mind you, I haven't played the tabletop Battletech for a long time, but what I saw definitely fits in with what I could remember from back in the day. Unfortunately, this does mean that certain aspects, like the aforementioned cheap headshots that I mentioned, may be grating on people who are used to more, shall we say, lenient computer tactical combat games. Now, as for the story itself, I'm of a mixed mind. I'm going to warn you that there's a little bit of a spoiler territory here, although I'm going to try to avoid specifics, so if you have issues with hearing any of it, skip the next couple of minutes. The story is linear. Extremely linear. You fight for the Arano restoration in the Aurigan Reach. You may accept side missions for other factions in the area, but they have literally no bearing on the storyline. Your destiny is set, the main battles will happen as the story dictates. If a mission involves a major story NPC, you will either kill them or you will keep them alive, as the mission says, and to do otherwise is a mission failure. You do get choices in the mission briefings between major storyline battles, but almost none of them impact the storyline. At all. They basically boil down to, oh, so you took that background style options, and while you are given the opportunity to show your motivations as to why you're fighting for this particular faction, it doesn't matter. It makes no difference in the ending, it's all irrelevant. You are fighting for them, and it really doesn't matter why. But you know what? That linearity does not matter. This is not an RPG, as I said, although it does have some character advancement and so on. This is a war game, and historically, war games cover a period of history. In this case, even the story is framed not as a progression that you're actually playing in currently, but as a look back at an event that already happened. So the fact that you can't deviate from the history already set forth is kind of expected. War games do allow you to explore what-ifs, alternate scenarios, and whether certain tactics might have worked better in battle. But at the end of the day, if you're playing a war game about the Saratoga campaign as the Americans, then your victory condition is going to be the same as it was in history. In the case of Battletech, just because the history is fictional, it's still history within the game's universe, and thus the story is going to follow the same steps it did in that fictional history. So with the gameplay being pretty faithful to the tabletop game, and the storyline being serviceable if not exactly spectacular, how do the technical aspects stack up? Well, on release, it could have used some more optimizations. Over the course of play, I didn't notice really much in the way of graphical oddities, although it was amusing when certain mechs decided it was more efficient to moonwalk back to a target hex and then spin around in place to a new facing. But there are a lot of delays in the game overall, from delays between weapon volleys to waiting around in orbit during transit, to cutscenes, especially during transit, that display the same jump shit transit every single time you travel to a new system. Some people might find this somewhat irritating, and I'll admit that it does get old after a while. There have been a few patches put out since I recorded the footage for this review, and there are already plans for making more tweaks and updates going forward, so maybe this will go ahead and get better as time goes on. Overall, my opinion of Battletech is about where my opinion of Shadowrun Returns was. It is a solid offering, and it displays a technical proficiency in execution that is true to the source material. It is a good game in its own right, although it is not perfect. There are some tweaks that need to be made, there are some areas of the universe that could do with some more representation, perhaps more interesting storylines that can be told, and so forth. But by that very statement, I have to admit that I am looking forward to what comes next. Most of my observations are things that applied to Shadowrun Returns as well, and the sequels to that game ended up making huge strides toward the potential that the game first promised. While I believe Battletech itself is a worthwhile game, especially if you're enamored of just running around and blowing up other mechs in the various skirmishes, I really have my eyes on any sequels that may or may not pan out over the coming years. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to call it here. This has been the RPG Crawler with my look at Battletech. If you like what you've seen, do remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for RPG content both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye.